Should Duane Brown go right back into the starting lineup when he's healthy? We'll talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, October 25th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangReadNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you enjoy the show and are watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Today we have our weekly mailbag show. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Let's begin with a question about the Jets' offensive line. John, Duane Brown is eligible to come off injured reserve this week. We're not sure whether he's going to play or not. The Jets could activate him. Do you think he should reclaim his position at left tackle given the improvement of the offensive line since he went out of the lineup? Now, that's a great question. And my answer to this question might be different if everybody was still healthy on the offensive line. You know, we could talk about Joe Tippmann, who may or may not be ready to go on Sunday. We'll wait to see what Robert Saleh has to say today. But I think my answer would definitely be different if Elijah Vera Tucker was still healthy, because I do think that the reconfigured offensive line after Brown left the lineup prior to week 3 was an upgrade. And if you've been following this podcast for months, you know that I was not a big fan of bringing Duane Brown back. In fact, you could even go back early last offseason. I did a show where I went through some of the potential Jets cap casualties, and there were literally 2 players where I said, you know what, this is an easy decision. One was Braxton Berrios, who of course was cut, and the other was Duane Brown, where I felt like he was an obvious guy to cut. I felt like counting on him at 38 years of age, coming off a season where he was already banged up, and he was going to have to head into an offseason where he was recovering from a serious injury, which I'm not sure we knew the extent of heading into the offseason, how seriously injured he was. It just felt to me like it was a bad idea depending on him. And through the first 2 weeks of the season, it certainly looked like a bad idea. I don't want to disrespect Duane Brown, who's had a great career in the NFL and who, quite frankly, did not need to sign with the Jets last year. You have to remember that at the point Duane Brown signed last year, the Jets were still viewed as a team that was going to be at the bottom of the NFL. They were coming off all those bad years. You know, the Adam Gase era was not that far in the rear view mirror. There really were not great reasons to sign with the Jets if you were Duane Brown. He had a great career. He could have retired, and he decided to come to the Jets. Not only that, but it would have been easy for him to just collect a paycheck after he got injured, shortly after signing. He came back and played hurt through much of the season and gave the Jets credible tackle play in a season where they were really decimated by injury at the tackle position. So I want to convey my appreciation to what Duane Brown did last year. But the fact of the matter was that it was always going to be a lot to ask him to play well this year at 38 years of age. I mean, these 38-year-old left tackles, they're not that many in the NFL. I know a couple of years ago, Andrew Whitworth may have won a Super Bowl with the Rams, but that's pretty old for any player, much less a guy playing the left tackle position. But the problem is now the Jets are so injured that once again, they may not have a choice. And I don't love doing this because once again, it's going to require you sliding Mekhi Becton over to right tackle. And, I don't love the idea of Becton always going back and forth. I mean, look, he's a pro. He's going to have to deal with it. And he's got experience playing both spots. But I do feel like Becton has maybe stabilized things a little bit at the left tackle position. He's not a great left tackle. He's certainly not having a Pro Bowl caliber season. But I think he has been, number one, an upgrade on Duane Brown, and number two, getting more comfortable each week. But I don't know what you do across from him. If you leave Becton at left tackle, I mean, Brown hasn't played right tackle in his whole career, essentially. So you'd be asking Brown to kind of change positions. And I know, again, he's a professional. He should be able to do it. But everything's different. You're just kind of reversing things, moving from left tackle to right tackle. And I feel like a younger guy who's not as established at left tackle, but Also a younger guy in Becton who has already moved back and forth, who's got ample experience at right tackle. I feel like if you put Brown back into the lineup, you kind of have to move Becton back to right tackle. It's not the greatest situation, especially if you're looking past the season, because what do you do? Brown's certainly not going to be back with the Jets in 2024. And Becton's kind of up in the air, and we know he wants to play left tackle. So it might make him less likely to come back if you want to bring him back. But the Jets have to win games right now. Right now, they're in the business of winning football games. So they have to find their best alignment. And, I don't know if Max Mitchell is really the answer. If Max Mitchell, if Brown has to sit out another week or two and Max Mitchell plays really well, then maybe you could talk yourself into leaving things as is. But, that's a lot to ask. And, I think the question is, are you a better offensive line with Duane Brown at left tackle and Mekhi Becton at right tackle? Or are you a better offensive line with Mekhi Becton at left tackle and Max Mitchell at right tackle? Even in Duane Brown's compromised state, even in his advanced age, I may go with Brown at left tackle, Becton at right tackle. It's not an easy call, and it's certainly not an ideal choice. I don't think the Jets did a great job this offseason. I still can't believe they went into the season with Brown as your plan A at left tackle, but what's done is done. And, they got to make the call. And at this point, Brown might be their best option. I don't love it. I certainly am not a big fan of depending this much on Duane Brown, but I think it's kind of the spot the Jets are in. Next question, also about the offensive line. John, can you comment as to why you think offensive line play around the NFL is so atrocious? Not only are offensive lines getting dominated, but these guys are also getting injured. Does the NFL Rules Committee need to look at some things to level the playing field? This seems to be a major factor as to why scoring across the NFL is down so far in 2023. Well, I think a lot of it goes back to development. In today's college game, offensive linemen are not being developed as well. And a lot of that goes to what the rules are in college. So in the NFL, linemen are only allowed to go 1 yard down the field on passing plays. In college, they're allowed to go 3 yards down the field. So they're allowed to go much further down the field. And what that means is that the screen game could be a much bigger part of college offenses. There's a lot more on the table when you're talking about throwing screens in college, because linemen could go 3 times as far down the field. And the screen game is all about getting your linemen down the field. So the screen game can be a much bigger percentage of your passing game in college. But as a result of that, because they're running so many more screens in college, linemen aren't used to traditional pass blocking sets. And I think that's a lot. I think that's really a lot of what goes into it, that they're just, because they aren't getting the reps, they're not as ready to come into the NFL, because this is not a recent phenomenon. This is something that's been going on for years and years in the NFL. I mean, I can go back. I remember even the early days of this podcast, 2016, 2017, when we first got this podcast off the ground. It was one of those things I was talking about. It's just the prevalence of these college offenses. It impacts the way players are developed in a lot of ways. Now, you're seeing a lot of college concepts gain mainstream acceptance in the NFL, in NFL offenses, but I don't think their players are being trained as robustly, especially on the offensive line, as they have been in the past. And I agree with you. I think it's a great point that, maybe this is part of the reason scoring's down. I think part of it's that, it's cyclical. You always hear about offenses are dominating all these designer schemes like Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. Well, it's inevitable defenses will eventually catch on. They'll figure out ways to stop these offenses. So I think, part of it's just defenses catching up to offenses, and then offenses will come up with the next innovation and they'll go back ahead and defenses will catch up with them a bit. So I think that plays into it as well. But yeah, I do think the offensive line has an impact. And I think a lot of it goes back to the way college offenses are run now. They don't really train NFL players. What can the NFL do about it? I mean, I don't know. Maybe the NFL ups the college rules, allows linemen to get further down the field so that NFL teams can run more screens. I mean, I short of that, the other option is, and this is true across the league, the NFL could really use a developmental league. And this is true at the quarterback position. It's true in a lot of spots. I don't know why the NFL doesn't have some sort of minor league system or some sort of, spring league or something like that. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to not have like a league where players can get game reps and develop. And part of this is, the way practices are run now. Teams aren't allowed to practice as intensely, and that's part of the collective bargaining agreement. It's something the players and owners negotiated. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's no one answer. I don't think that there's a solution to make practices tougher, though, because the players won't let them. And that's part of what the players negotiate, and it's the players' right to negotiate that. So that's another thing to think about. Anyway, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about this weekend's upcoming game. Jets will play the New York Giants. How big is it for the Jets? Is it a must-win? Not exactly. We'll talk about it more as we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. You should not have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Plus, they offer their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all the good stuff. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And you can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. I've used Gametime myself back in the summer. The end of the summer, I went to the U.S. Open. I needed last-minute tickets. It's so easy to use. A lot of other ticket sites take you through unnecessary hurdles. Not Gametime. It's a great place to buy tickets. And with the Gametime guarantee, it means you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Gametime will credit you with 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, one word, no space, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes Monday through Friday each day, and then bonus episodes as needed. We continue with our mailbag show. Our next question, John, is Sunday's game against the Giants a must win? No, this game's not a must win. If the Jets lose, the season goes on. I think it's an important game for the Jets from a couple standpoints. Number one, we've talked about this a lot. If you're an everydayer, you've heard it a lot. The Jets had to survive that first 6-week stretch. 2-4 minimum, 3-3. That's pretty good. I mean, based on the schedule the Jets have had, get through the first 500, get to the bye 500. That's what we were hoping for. I mean, really, I think the objective was to start this season 3-3 through the first 6. I could have lived with 2-4, but 3-3, well, it's got a better ring to it. So now we're beginning the second phase of the season, not the second half, because we're only 6 games into a 17-game schedule. But we're beginning the second phase. You want to get off to a good note, because if the Jets lose, it could be like the start of, one of those stretches where the Jets don't play well, and they really do need to clean up in this next couple of weeks, because they have a real opportunity. I mean, this team could easily, if they take care of business, they could easily be 6-3. But in the NFL, I mean, you're always one game away from a danger zone. And if the Jets lose this game, you wonder how it plays on the team's confidence. You're always one game away from maybe some, people questioning what's going on. You just want to avoid it, especially when you have a winnable game in front of you. And there's also a tangible aspect to this. I think that you don't want to lose a game like this, because the Giants just aren't that great of a team. I mean, they're not as bad as the Patriots. I don't think they're as bad as Denver. I think they're more of like, even though the Jets have a better record, I think they're more on the Jets level. I think they're kind of like a middle of the pack kind of team, but still, I would say this is a game the Jets probably should win. And, this AFC playoff race is very tight. It's going to stay very tight. And I feel like if you lose this game, this is one of those games that if you lose, you get to the end of the season and you miss the playoffs by one game, you're always going to look back. What are the games we should have won? And this is one of them. Now, if the Jets lose, it's not the end of the season, so I can't say it's a must win. And we use this phrase too much. I've used this phrase twice so far this year, once against Kansas City, once against Denver. I think in both cases going into the game, it was fair, because the way the Jets were playing heading into Kansas City, I felt like they needed to play well. And they did play well, even though they didn't win the game. So maybe it was a must play well. I wasn't expecting the Jets to, play like that and lose. So the next week against Denver was absolutely a must win. If the Jets had lost that game, I'm pretty convinced the Jets would have lost to the Eagles if they had lost to Denver. I'm pretty sure we're talking about a 1-5 football team. This Giants game, it's not a must win. I mean, the Jets can survive 3-4. The schedule is still opening up for them. There's not a ton of games where I look at it and I say that's a game that should be a loss. So I think there's still plenty of opportunity for this football team, even if they lose, but you don't want to lose. There's a difference between a game you should win. There's a difference between a game where you say, no big deal if you lose. And there's difference between there's a difference between saying this loss would hurt and it's a must win. These are all different things. I think this is a loss that would hurt the Jets. I don't think it's the type of thing that would necessarily finish them off, though. Next question, John. I see Aaron Rodgers is making some headlines about a potential return later this season. What do you think? I'm not a doctor. Everybody I know who knows the first thing about Achilles injuries seems to be very skeptical that Rodgers is going to be able to return. I know that he was spotted on the field a couple weeks ago throwing. He was standing. The feedback I've heard from people who actually know this stuff suggests that it's one thing for him to be standing. It's another thing for him to be able to take the field with in an NFL setting where guys are 300 pounders are going to be bearing down on you, and have the Achilles healed enough that he's in no danger. It seems to be a lot of skepticism. Here's what I'll say: modern medicine's amazing. I mean, I've also heard people in the know tell me that Joe Namath, whose career was destroyed by knee injuries, if he was around today, it would be no big deal. They'd take him, and it'd be relatively easy to fix him up, and he'd be good to go. And the second half of his career would have played out differently. You never rule anything out with you see some of the modern advances that have been made medically, even in the last couple of years. It's remarkable. I won't rule anything out, but what I will say is that I think a Rodgers return this year is not something I'm going to count on. I think if it happens, it's a pleasant surprise. I think you'll be happy to see it. You hope they would not rush him back too soon, because that's also the danger. I remember years and years ago when I was a kid, Jerry Rice tore his ACL week 1 of that season. I think it was 97, and he came back before the end of the regular season. It was one of the most remarkable recoveries. I mean, think about this. It was like the mid to late 1990s. So this was over 20 years ago. 20 years without advances. 20 years. Think about the medicine. If we've had advances, think about the medicine of over 2 decades ago. He came back in season, but he rushed back and got re-injured. And Rice has since admitted that he should not have rushed back. So you do worry about that a little bit. But I think it's one of those things you have to view as like a pleasant surprise if it happens. And I mean, the other thing I'll say, the Jets are floating the story. The Jets are not exactly the team that has the most credibility when it comes to injury reports. The Jets have given you a lot through the years about guys they claimed were coming back who had suffered season-ending injuries. I don't need to remind you what happened with Mekhi Becton 2 years ago when they first diagnosed it. They claimed that he'd be back mid-season. I mean, I remember even going further back, and I know different coaching staff, but in 2019, CJ Mosley suffered an injury week 1 against Buffalo, and they made it sound like he'd be good to go week 2. He essentially missed the rest of the season. He came back for like 1 game a few weeks later against New England and was playing hurt and really didn't play again the rest of the season. So I think it's unlikely based on what I know. Could Rodgers come back? Yes, but it's not something I want to count on. It's more of, if it happens, it's great, but it's not something that it's one of those things I think you have to believe it to see it. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to close out our show after the way he performed Sunday. People want to know about Mecole Hardman and why the Jets could not make it work. I'll give you some thoughts on that continuing this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to make 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add the job and the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. Jets, when they build their roster, I don't know that they need LinkedIn Jobs. They have their own scouting staff, but you probably don't have a scouting staff like the Jets do. You can use LinkedIn Jobs as your scouting staff, and that's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So if you're a big Jets fan, you can pick Garrett Wilson for more than one touchdown. You can pick Breece Hall for more than 80 yards this coming week. And PrizePicks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts. PrizePicks also now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDON NFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. One more time, it's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on our weekly Wednesday mailbag show. Our next question. 3 straight years Saleh gives up on a player. Hardman does a great job this week for the Chiefs. Why does Saleh keep doing this? Well, I'm trying to think about the other players Saleh gave up on. I guess 2 years ago, maybe you'd say it was Denzel Mims. Maybe last year it was Elijah Moore. Neither of those guys was very good. Mims, not really an NFL caliber receiver, if we're going to be honest. And Elijah Moore, for all of the expectations, for all of the flashes, not that great of a player. And by the way, Elijah Moore also was a guy who complained in the middle of a winning streak that he wasn't getting the ball enough, and stormed out of practice and demanded the trade. So let's go easy. I think those are the other two guys Saleh quit on. Hardman's kind of a weird one for me from the standpoint that I don't think Hardman's that good either. But number one, again, he was losing snaps to Randall Cobb. And Saleh's not great with the media. Saleh sometimes says things to the media that don't make sense. And one of them came this week when he was asked about the Hardman trade. And he talked about how Xavier Gipson had outplayed Hardman. Well, one, Hardman was losing snaps to Randall Cobb, who might be the worst player in the NFL this year. Two, Gipson has one catch this season, so it's not like Gipson is dominating. And three, the Jets got absolutely nothing in return for Hardman. I mean, the Jets might as well have given Hardman away. They saved less than $1 million in cap space. The return that they got draft pick wise was flopping a 7 for a 6. So they moved from the 7th round to the 6th round. It's not even this year. It's 2 years down the line. So it was very odd to me that happened. Sometimes you misjudge what's in your locker room. Last year, the Jets signed a pass rusher from Houston named Jacob Martin in the offseason, and they brought him in to be a situational pass rusher. I think in that case, it was pretty clear the Jets underestimated what they had in Bryce Huff. And I think Martin was almost signed to maybe phase Huff out. Huff came out and had a great season, and Huff essentially took Martin's role. And the Jets ended up trading Martin during the season. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, you can see where this happened. Young guy outperformed the free agent you brought in. You're doing it based on merit. Hey, that's cool. We'll save a couple $1 million by trading Martin. That made sense. That's not what happened in the situation. I mean, you can't really say that Gipson outperformed Hardman. I guess, maybe he won the return job and had that touchdown against Buffalo. But then, the Jets were so skeptical. The Jets seem kind of skeptical about Gipson right now. They had Cobb returning punts against Philadelphia. I mean, that's like, if you want somebody with sure hands, you put Hardman back there, don't you? Very odd. It's almost like something that makes me believe that there were things going on behind the scenes that the Jets didn't tell us about. Because while Mecole Hardman's not a great player, let's just give the Jets the benefit of the doubt, even though they don't deserve it for this because they're playing Randall Cobb, half the snaps. And Randall Cobb's their number 3 receiver. So the Jets don't really deserve a benefit of the doubt here, but let's give it to them anyway. Let's say it makes sense that Cobb's the number 3 receiver. I really should just move on from that one because it doesn't make sense, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say, okay, Gibson's passed Hardman on the depth chart. He's the number 4 receiver. I mean, Hardman's still a good number 5 receiver. And it's not like it'd be one thing if you were saving a lot of money, but because of the way the contract was structured, the Jets essentially guaranteed all that money, and all the money is still on the Jets cap. It's not like maybe if you got a good draft pick in return, I could see it. They didn't though. They barely got anything. So Hardman's, if nothing else, he's a good number 5 receiver. He's a guy who's at least produced at a moderate level in the NFL. Very strange. I don't know exactly what happened. And it makes me believe that there's more going on behind the scenes than has been mentioned because otherwise, I don't see why you do it. It's almost like they wanted to get him out of the locker room, and Hardman going to Kansas City and having a solid game, doesn't exactly make the Jets look all that great if we're going to be honest. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. Tomorrow we'll have our crossover Thursday show with Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants. Look forward to chatting with you then.